What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today we're doing another weapon build. More specifically we're looking at Perforator, which is a ultimate hand cannon which most recently alongside two other weapons were changed, aka buffed in the game. Now I want to start off by saying that I tried this weapon in many different scenarios, and essentially a lot of the times when it comes to, you know, like putting a weapon through its paces, you kind of like first thing you do is you figure out whether it's good at dealing with bosses or whether it's better for mobbing. And Perforator has a weird identity crisis where it's definitely not best in slot for bossing, but it absolutely can do that and deals quite a bit of damage. And it's also definitely not best in slot in mobbing, but it can absolutely do mobbing and kill its fair share of mobs super fast as long as you can get the unique effect proc. So instead of me trying to figure out which of my current meta weapons I would replace with this, I ended up just resigning myself to having fun with it and essentially murdering my frame rate, because that is of course the other thing that this weapon is exceptionally good at, as it launches all these little mini cluster explosions everywhere. So we're gonna jump into the build, but first things first, let's go ahead and just look at the unique ability over here. And essentially how this works is it says that critical hits or hits on a weak point spawn explosive scanners. Now explosive scanners is basically the cluster munitions that you see, these little bombs that drop. Now when they explode on contact with terrain, so they don't explode when they hit the enemy or anything like that. They basically fall from the point of impact, and as soon as they hit the ground they explode, right? And they inflict detect on enemies within the explosion range. Now first things first, the scanners themselves, on a critical hit, maybe it's a good idea for me to move my old face. On a critical hit you get 5 times the scanners, right? On a weak point hit you get 1 time. So obviously you're going to get way more bang for your buck from getting crits with this weapon. So that should already be kind of like an indication to us what we should be kind of like going for. But we shouldn't leave weak point damage behind, because also what we need to remember is crits on weak points is also super juicy and does, you know, produce a lot of damage. So the radius is 5 meters and the firearm damage times 35 is how much damage those little explosives do. Now the detect effect that is mentioned here, basically what this does is it lasts for 10 seconds and it's essentially a debuff or on the enemy or a buff for you. Basically what it does is it enemies that are inflicted by detect take 10% more weak point damage. So it's another reason why weak point damage is possibly a good thing for us to look at with this build. So just in practice what we're talking about is this. Basically this is a controlled environment of course, but this is essentially what you're looking at. So as long as you are hitting weak points, which in rank and file enemies is of course headshots, then you're getting that. And of course every once in a while when you do get a crit, then you're going to just see a whole bunch of these bombs essentially falling out of the enemy. And yeah, it does quite a bit of damage to the main target that you're hitting. That's usually like a 1 or a 2 tap, and then the enemies around it can sometimes die to this as well. And the point is, depending on there, we got a nice big crit over there. The point is, however accurate you can be with this, of course you can do this from the hip as well. That's just way harder. But as accurate as you can be with this means that's how you're just going to benefit from way more AoE damage. You're just going to see those numbers roll up. And like I said, those frame rates dropping. So let's slap the modules in and see how we put this bad boy together. Now, as usual, we are going to start with what I consider to be the typical 3 that you always start with. You guys already know this. If you've watched any gun build video ever, you'll know that you start with action and reaction. And then of course you also need to give yourself some rifling reinforcement. These two are the most direct sources of a firearm attack, and both of these should be a standard staple on pretty much every weapon, since that's just one of the best ways for you to up your damage profile. Now generally speaking, what follows as the third mod in this tripod is a fire rate mod. But in the case of this particular weapon, it's not that important for us to be able to shoot super fast. It is beneficial, of course, to be able to fire rounds out quickly, especially compared, or rather paired with the ultimate mod that we're going to use. But at the same time, we are very much concerned with trying to up our critical hit and our critical hit damage, as well as our weak point damage as much as we can, because most of our damage is going to be derived from those stats. Or more, I suppose, importantly, those stats are also responsible for triggering the unique effect, and that's what we kind of want with this thing. We want those little fucking bombs to be like flying everywhere. So basically what you need is you need a fire rate mod that also gives you a little bit of additional crit stat, right? So in that case, we can use something like fire rate concentration. This gives you 4% of additional critical hit damage, and that's very, very welcome. All right. So before I actually put that on, maybe we can just look at the base stats here, and we can see that we start off with a 20% critical hit rate, and we have a 2 times multiplier on the critical hit damage, and then we also have a 2.25 times on weak point damage. So these are really, really sexy stats to start from. All right. So let's go ahead and put in that fire rate mod that I had here just now, fire rate concentration. So now we can start actually increasing our stats and basically just making it sexier. Now, our next way of getting crit hit and crit damage is 2 blue mods. Basically, we have better insight, which gives us critical hit rate, and we have better concentration, which gives us critical hit damage. With both of those in, we are starting to inch our way towards 30% of critical hit rate, and we're already setting on almost a 3 times multiplier for the critical hit damage, which is super, super sexy. Now, at this point in time, what we can do is we can use one of the newer mods called bullet integration. This once again gives us some firearm attack, and it gives us some critical hit damage. So both of these two stats are super welcome. We definitely want them. And then we also can basically put ourselves in a magazine and an ammo mod, right, to give us more ammo. But once again here, what we can hope to do is we can actually just give ourselves a little bit more of critical hit rate. So we're going to use inside support ammo here. Inside support ammo gives us 30% increased rounds per magazine, but it also gives us 1.5% critical hit rate, which is not a lot, but every little bit helps as we try to squeeze in as much of this as we possibly can. Then we also want to go ahead and put in something called Insight Focus. Insight Focus is a great mod because it gives you critical hit rate and it gives you critical hit damage. So that's just going to give us a little bit more even of what we are looking for. So basically here now we are sitting at almost 30% critical hit rate, and we have a 3.2 times multiplier. Now, at this point in time, there's really only 2 more mods for us to look at. First of all, since we are trying to also concentrate on hitting hard on those weak points, we want to be getting ourselves a little bit of additional weak point damage as well. There's a blue mod for this, which is just simple weak point sight. This one over here, this gives us a flat 35% increased weak point damage. So this is also a good one for us to use. And then that leaves 1 slot open for us, and generally speaking, it's always a good idea to try and find yourself a sexy ultimate mod to use. Now, I have 2 suggestions for you here, and basically it comes down to what you want, how you want the weapon to perform, what's more important for you, and I'll explain. For me personally, I run payout, okay? And I just need to quickly shuffle some mods around here, obviously, just to make sure that we can fit them in. Inside Focus is on my flex slot, so I didn't have to burn another catalyst on that. So obviously, if you build it, just be sure to do it the same. Otherwise, you're going to run out of, capacity. But either which way, Payout over here is the mod of choice for me. Now, Payout is a unique special mod to, I believe, impact rounds. I know that it doesn't exist on some of the other ones. I don't know if it's specifically unique to impact, but it's one of the reasons why impact weapons are kind of sexy, because they have access to this mod. So Payout, when landing a firearm weak point attack, rounds are not consumed for 3 seconds, and it has a 15-second cooldown. The reason why I like this is obviously because of the fact that when you land a weak point, which you're going to be doing in any case because you want to spawn those bombs, then for the next 3 seconds you get free shots, and those free shots, when they crit and hit weak point, they spawn more explosives. So now, instead of the usual 7 bullets in the in the magazine that you have, now you have probably something like 11 to 12 shots, depending on how fast you can get those shots out and how accurate you are, and all of those will basically spawn or have a chance to spawn these explosives. So I think this is a really, really good mod. Now, the alternative, right, if you are looking to run something else, you could potentially run dopaminergic activation. Dopaminergic activation also functions off of weak point hit, but what this does is it drastically increases your firearm critical hit rate as well as your critical hit damage, and it has a fairly low cooldown of 5 seconds. This then means that while, yes, you will have limited or less ammo than my solution with Payout at the top, the point is that this is going to mean that you are going to crit more regularly. And critting more regularly, of course, also means more bombs. So this is the 2 sides of the coin for me. I would say that you should think about it this way. If you are playing a Descendant that has a way of manipulating your critical hit rate on weapons so that you can get a higher stat, like Haley, for example, and some of the footage that you saw, I believe, near the beginning of the video, then I think payout is a phenomenal option, right? Because the point is you already have high critical hit, almost 100%, so you don't really benefit from dopaminergic, but you absolutely do benefit from having more bullets because you deal more damage. And in that way, I would say that payout might be the solution for you if you are looking to use this to do void intercept bosses. For some reason, I think there's better options, let's be honest, but you could be one of those people. Or if you want to be using this to deal massive amounts of damage to basically, like, you know, yellow bars. And again, if you're using a Descendant that can artificially increase the stats of the weapon. So like, for example, Enzo is another good example as well. Then in the case of like the footage that you've been seeing of me running with Blair and stuff like that, then in that case, dopaminergic might be a better option because you already kind of like you use the weapon as like a support basically. So you are using your abilities, everything like that, but you're using the weapon to deal with chunky enemies that your great skill based damage is not doing, right? So you're running bunny, everything like that, so you have no problem with killing rank and file enemies, but the yellow bars is where you get stuck. Then dopaminergic is a good choice for you because yes, you have a few less shots, but those shots are far more meaningful and hit far harder, and so therefore you can chunk through these enemies really quickly. Either which way, I don't think you go wrong with whichever one you choose. I think they're both phenomenal. So go ahead and pick whichever one or test both and kind of find what you enjoy using. Last but not least, absolutely, we need to talk substats. So I think it goes without saying that critical hit rate, critical hit damage, and firearm attack are really good for us here. Firearm attack by default is just a stat that you want on weapons because it just influences the weapon's damage in so many different ways. In particular, in this case, this weapon's damage is increased by the actual shots, but also the explosions from the bombs. And then critical hit rate and critical hit damage, because of course those directly influence the damage that we get from you know, critting, but also how oftentimes we can get that bomb drop to proc. Now, if you are wanting to set this up in a way that every once in a while you can use this against void intercept bosses or something like that, then of course bonus firearm attack against Colossus is a no-brainer. It allows you to deal quite a bit more additional damage to them. However, if this is going to be a support weapon for you and you plan on using this to pretty much you know, just kill yellow bars, and you know, like I was goofing around with Blair and stuff like this and just using this to pop like the tough enemies that didn't go down immediately, then weak point damage is a really great choice because you're doing that in any case. You're going for the headshot so you can get the explosions and all that stuff. Or you can go rounds per magazine if that's something that really irks you. I don't think rounds per magazine is the best choice. I'm just mentioning it because it really equates to like one additional bullet, which is, you know, come on, in the grand scheme of things, the weak point damage means a lot more for us. And that's it for the build. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. And as usual, fucking cheers.